أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where on the globe you are. My name is Asya Ahmed, and I am the events coordinator at Khalil Center, based out of our headquarters in the beautiful Chicago, Illinois. Before we begin, I wanted to provide you with a brief introduction to our organization. Khalil Center is a not-for-profit spiritual wellness center that provides communities with direct mental health services such as individual counseling, couples therapy, along with religious consultation. Our specialty is an Islamically integrated therapeutic approach, which is a beautiful blend of sacred tradition and professional psychology. Along with this, Khalil Center also provides psychosocial education to communities through workshops, seminars, trainings, and programs such as this. For more information, you can go onto our website at www.khalilcenter.com, where we have a list of workshops we offer. You can also register to receive updates through email of local and virtual programming and workshops provided by Khalil Center. We also have a YouTube channel, which you probably are on right now, where you can view short video clips on various topics related to mental health. If you haven't done so already, please follow us on our social media handles for up-to-date information at Khalil Center. And of course, programs such as these are not possible without your generous support and your donations, which directly benefit Muslims who are struggling with mental health, especially during this crucial time as we navigate through this pandemic. These donations allow us to continue to create programs such as this. So you can make your donations at khalilcenter.com/donate. If you are just logging on, welcome. Today's topic is Things I Wish I Knew Before Getting Married, presented by Dr. Human Kishavarzi and Ustad Sana Muhyiddin. The Prophet ﷺ says, there is no house that has been built in Islam more beloved in the sights of Allah than through marriage. Marriage is a beautiful gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Both husband and wife should treasure it. This workshop is aimed to provide you with the Muslim marriage roadmap of tools to help you get more out of your marriage every day. And without further ado, we have our very first speaker, Ustada Sana Muhyiddin. I will just give you a brief introduction of Sister Sana. She is a licensed professional counselor working as a therapist at Khalil Center. She holds a master's in arts from Northeastern Illinois University in counselor education, specializing in marital and family therapy. Ustada Sana completed her undergraduate studies at Texas A&M University, majoring in health and minoring in religious studies. Her experience ranges from working with couples, families, individuals, and adolescents. Ustada Sana also holds ijazat in various Islamic sciences, including hadith, fiqh, tafsir, and Arabic. And here is Ustada Sana. Just to let you all know, please stick around till the end of the program for a Q&A. If you have any questions, you can submit them or write them down and ask them towards the end, and we will try to get to as many as possible. So, Assalamu alaikum, Ustada Sana. How are you?
Alaikum salam. I'm well, thank you.
I'm just going to pass this along to you, inshallah.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya. So, welcome everybody. I'm excited to be talking to you about this topic. So, we're going to be talking about things I wish I knew before I married. Before I kind of get into that topic, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of marriage. So, you can go to the next slide. The purpose of marriage in Islam. So the first thing I want to say is that there's not one specified purpose of marriage. We don't necessarily say that this is the reason we get married. We have a lot of reasons for why we get married and why marriage is encouraged or or at least liked in Islam. So for the purposes of this talk, however, I kind of wanted to highlight a couple of different reasons, maybe why we seek marriage, or why marriage can be a really good thing. The first thing is that through a marriage, right, through a relationship, we can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's through a relationship, through that relationship which can create an environment in which you feel closer to Allah. And it could be through different ways. Like it could be because you guys encourage each other to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or because you now have a stable home in which you can pursue your relationship with Allah. It doesn't have to be through one way, but marriage can be a means through which you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And conversely, if you're struggling in your marriage, which inshallah that happens to nobody, but it does happen from time to time, if you're struggling in your marriage, that can also be a way to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is one, and I would say maybe the most important purpose of marriage in Islam. The second is marriage is considered a form of worship. So if we go in with intention, right, because we know from hadith that actions are based on their intentions or judged by their intentions, that then we have fulfilled a form of worship. So if we go into marriage with the intention, I am doing this to please my Lord, to fulfill a form of worship, to be able to get closer to my Lord, you can have a multitude of intentions and inshallah all of them count, then this is also a great purpose of marriage. And I encourage everybody to have that intention. And if you didn't have that intention if you're already married, to make that intention now. The beautiful thing about intentions is we can make them before an act, during an act, and when an act is complete. And we should do that. So if you haven't made that intention, if you're married, I encourage you to make that now. That marriage is also a form of worship. And then inshallah, we get ajr for every second that we're married. Also, marriage is a great way to find Sakina. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that one of his signs is that he created for you spouses from among yourselves so that you may find comfort in them. And he has placed between you compassion and mercy. Surely in this are signs for those who reflect. This is from Surah Rum. And this is the ayah that, of course, is always quoted on wedding invitations. But this ayah, if we think about it, that he says that he created spouses for us so that we could find, and the word is Sakina, translated here as comfort. Sakina, however, can mean a multitude of things, and these are the dictionary definitions. That Sakina is a condition or a place of rest, and it's also a home. Sakina is a place where you go at the end of the day to find comfort. It's a place where you find rest. And a marriage, a relationship, according to the Quran, can be a place where we find that rest and that comfort. I will also add that if Sakina hasn't been achieved, the marriage hasn't reached its potential, but it's still okay. It happens and it's okay. But it's a great benefit, it's an added benefit of having Sakina in your relationship. And all of that bundled together helps to create a relationship with Allah, helps marriage to be a form of worship. But what we're looking at is how to create that Sakina in our relationships. So the benefit of Sakina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he is the one who sends down serenity upon the hearts of the believers so that they may increase even more in their faith. To Allah alone belong the forces of the heavens and the earth, and Allah is all-knowing. Again, he says, Alladhi anzala Sakina, that he sends down this idea of Sakina, right? We're looking for that serenity. We're looking for that peace, that comfort, that home in our relationships. And if we prepare beforehand for our relationships, we can, inshallah, achieve them. Okay, so what are we talking about today? The things I wish I knew before I was married. Why? Why are we talking about this? I can't tell you how many people come to me and ask me, okay, I want to get married. How do I prepare for marriage? And the one thing that I always say is that you have to prepare yourself. People always ask, what are I need to know the rights and responsibilities. I need to buy this book about the rights and responsibilities. I need to prepare in this way. And yeah, you should maybe study up on those things. But what's more important, and what I argue is more important today, is to learn more about yourself and to prepare your own self. To bring your best self into relationship is the best way to prepare for marriage. So what do the statistics say? That 31% of Muslim marriages end in divorce. And this is a little bit less than maybe the normative population, which is almost 50%. But it's still there. It's still high. That we may go into marriages and maybe not find that sakina that I talked about earlier. And may not find that comfort in that home and that rest, which may lead to unhappiness in a marriage. Again, I don't want to say that divorce is a really bad thing. It's something we should avoid. Sometimes it's necessary, but it does lead to a lot of unhappiness. It does lead to problems for yourself. And so what we want to do is to prepare the best way for our marriage so that we can avoid having issues in it. Anything important that we want to prepare for in life requires preparation and reflection. Anything that we want to do that we want to excel at, we prepare for it. So, for example, the Olympics are going on, and I love the Olympics. I don't know how anyone else feels about it, but these athletes have prepared their entire lives for this event. They have, they've trained and studied and all of those things to get to this point. But then also before they get into before they jump in the pool or before they get, on the field or whatever, they sit and they reflect on what they're doing. They will maybe meditate. They will maybe picture themselves in the pool. They'll maybe picture the strokes they're going to use if we're talking about swimming. They're thinking about how to perform that specific act, and that puts that in the place of doing that thing. And when you do that, when you really put yourself in the place of what you're doing, you're also lessening the anxiety that you feel beforehand because you feel prepared. We also do this like when we pray. When we stand up to pray and perform our prayers, we do first of all, we make wudu, right? We put ourselves in the zone, we get ready, we stand in a clean place, but we also pray the nawafil, or we pray the sunnah. And those are the preparations for the fard. So we're putting ourselves in the place, knowing what we're doing. So when we do the main event, when we do the fard, we're ready for it, right? So I argue the same thing about marriage, right? If we are going to be preparing for marriage, and if you want to know how can I prepare for marriage, put yourself really in the place of this is what it's going to be like when I get married. So how do we do that? We gather knowledge, right? And so again, I don't mean we only learn about the rights and responsibilities, or we only read a book like Kitabun Nikah or something, although those are good things to do, right? What I encourage and what I would like for us to think about more is gathering knowledge about ourselves before we get married. So there's a couple of areas that I want to touch on. The first is know yourself, right? Learn more about yourself. Learn more about what you need in your life, and learn more about what you want in your life, and understand that needs and wants are different. And then know where your faults lie. What do you need to work on? What do you need to improve on? And knowing all of these things, I guarantee you, will help you so much when you get to that point when you're married. So know yourself. What does this mean? This is, I'm sure maybe you've seen this before, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this pyramid that he created that shows us basically our basic needs that we need to live our lives. So at the base, we have our physiological needs, like we all need food, water, warmth, rest. Once we have those things, then we can move on to the next level. Then we need safety and security. Then we need to feel safe in where we are. And once we have that, then we can move on to the next level, which is working on our intimate relationships, our friends, that sense of belonging, which is important, right? And all of that is bracketed in your psychological needs, right? Once you take care of your basic needs, then you can move on to your psychological needs. So then after that, then you have the sense of esteem, your feeling of accomplishment, your feeling of being valued and loved. Like those are also what you work on next once you've established the intimate relationships and the friends. And once you've maybe gained all those bases, then he says, then you can reach self-actualization. You can reach self-actualization. So I want us to focus on those psychological needs. Who are you, and what things make you who you are that you need to be fulfilled in your relationship? And that's different for everybody, because it really depends on how we were raised, where we come from, what our families are like. All of those things play a role in that sense of belonging and how we want to achieve it. And there are ways to really delve into this. It's not really just thinking about it, but I'll talk about it a little bit later. But this is the first thing that I want us to think about. The next is understanding our concentric circles. So when part of what makes me me are my concentric circles of responsibility. So I have myself in the middle, right? And then I have my family, and then I have my community, and then I have where I live and the world altogether. So all of these circles of responsibility play a big role in who I am, and understanding them and knowing them, because they will also play a part in my relationship. Say I have a family that maybe needs me to help out. Maybe I have my parents that need my assistance, or I have a sibling that needs my assistance, or I have money tied in with family a little bit. This is going to be important in my marriage. So understanding this and knowing this first is extremely important. And maybe I have, part of our concentric circles is work. So maybe my job is demanding. Maybe this is something I need to recognize so that I can share it with a potential spouse. That, my job, I work this many hours. This is how it is. This is how it has to be. It's important to share that, to first know that for yourself, and then to be able to share that with a potential spouse, so that everything is communicated, everything is known. So understanding where your responsibilities lie before you get married is also really, really important. And we see this in this hadith of Jabir radiallahu anh. So Jabir radiallahu anh was a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, who his father died. He was shaheed in one of the battles. And he had 4 sisters who were unmarried and he needed to take care of. He understood that they were his responsibility. So when we're talking about concentric circles of responsibility, this is what he recognizes. I have these sisters that I need to care for. So when he got married, as you read in the hadith, he married a woman who had been previously married, who understood the responsibilities of him having these sisters. And when the Prophet ﷺ asked him, why didn't you marry a young girl? Why did you marry a woman who had been previously married? He said, because I recognize that I have these sisters that I need to raise, and I wanted a woman who would help me in that. So again, so this is we all have our own experiences. We all have our own responsibilities, and knowing that and understanding that before we get married is really important. And this later came to Jabir radiallahu anhu's benefit, because there's a beautiful story at the during the Battle of Khandaq, when they were digging the ditch, and the Prophet ﷺ was hungry. He was very, very hungry. All the companions were hungry. They had been digging and working for so long, and Jabir radiallahu anh, he recognized this. So he invited the Prophet ﷺ to his home for a meal. And he told his wife, prepare a meal for the Prophet ﷺ. We're going to invite him over. And the Prophet ﷺ then turned to all of his companions and said, Jabir invited us for a meal. Let's all go. Right. And his wife, she handled the situation with grace, and she handled it. And it ended up being a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ that everybody was able to eat at that battle due to his presence. But I'm really focusing on Jabir radiallahu anhu's wife and how she must have felt, and then how she was able to handle that. Maybe because she was somebody that was older and that had experience and kind of knew how to handle that. So knowing, again, this is tied to knowing your responsibilities and understanding that when seeking out a spouse. So the next thing that I encourage us to gather information about is your needs. Know your own needs. What do you need to get married? So what is a need? A need is something that you require, or something that's a necessity or an obligation. We all have needs, and needs are not bad things. Needs are separate from wants, right? But we all have needs that are, in marriage, for example, these things are necessary for your sense of fulfillment. We're talking about Sakina, right? Going back to the beginning of the slide. They're all necessary for that fulfilling sense of Sakina within your marriage. So knowing that maybe, for example, my love languages, I have maybe, if you've never heard of love languages, I'll tell you really quick. Love languages is the theory that, we all perceive and speak love in one of 5 languages. And they are physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, and I'll think of the 5th in a second. So there's a quiz you can take, and you can, find out what your love language is. And for example, say my love language is, acts of service. I really need someone to wash the dishes for me and to clean up the house. And that's how I feel loved. That's what I know. So when I get married, I'm going to look for somebody who is agrees to do the housework with me, who doesn't say, no, it's just a woman's job to do the housework, for example. And there are many, many examples that we go into. So knowing that about yourself, if I know, for example, that physical affection is one of my love languages, then I'll want to marry someone that understands that and who is not like, has a zone of no touch around them, because that would not fulfill my need within marriage. And then also knowing my deal breakers. Maybe there are some things that I just cannot take. Like, I need to marry someone that's taller than me. I cannot marry someone that's shorter than me, for example. Then that's my deal breaker, right? And so knowing that about myself, because later on, when we're married and 5 years down the line, as Dr. Human's going to discuss later, and maybe we're having some issues or maybe something's going on, at least that thing is not there, right? At least, for example, the person's taller than me. That doesn't matter to me, but this is just an example. So these are things that we need to, examine about ourselves. These are things that we need to know about ourselves before we go into marriage, so that we're not also doing a disservice to the person we're marrying, right? We've done full background information about ourselves to ourselves so that I know like what I need and what I want. Okay. The next area that I really would like us to delve into is knowing your wants, right? Understand again the idea between difference between wants and needs. Wants are something that we don't reject in Islam. Like, wants are okay. It's okay to want things. It's okay to have preferences. However, we do put limitations on them, right? We don't say that you let your wants run rampant, run wild, and that's all you look for, because that's really feeding into your nafs, is really, allowing your nafs to take control. So having wants is acceptable, but don't go into excess with them. And understand that marriage fulfills both needs and wants, right? Marriage can be both. Marriage can be fulfilling your needs and your wants, but we prioritize our needs. And your wants can beautify that need, right? Your things that you prefer, things that you like, they can beautify that situation of what you need, and they can beautify your marriage. So again, knowing these are things that I just kind of want in my marriage, right? And it's important to understand the distinction that we can fulfill our needs through our wants, that we can bring them both together. But we want to recognize is that, my wants, I want to do a little bit of effort on myself, so that my wants are just not taking over this marriage, right? So that I am not the number one person in this marriage, and I'm demanding this and this and this and this, and I'm making my spouse fulfill them, right? I know what they are, and I'm willing to compromise on them, but I know what they are. And I'll also add in the difference between needs and wants. The wants are those things that we're willing to compromise on, that we're okay maybe letting go of, that we can live without, or that we might give up because out of love for our spouse, and letting them have maybe what they want. So these are these are all areas that we want to examine. Also, keep in mind is that suppression is not the key here, right? We're not looking to suppress who we are. We're not looking to deny who we are at our core, right? The Prophet ﷺ said that religion, verily the religion is easy, and no one burdens himself in religion, but that it overwhelms him. Follow the right course, seek closeness to Allah, give glad tidings, and seek help for worship in the morning and the evening and a part of the night. So I really want us to focus on that part that's bolded there, that no one burdens himself in religion, but that it overwhelms him. And what that means really is take it slow, right? Don't jump in full force and try to take everything on, because that's not sustainable, right? The Prophet ﷺ also told us that Allah, the most beloved acts to Allah, are the ones that are consistent, even if they're small, right? So if you need to, it's okay if you start small, or if you do less, or if you are maybe do a lot, right? Either one is fine as long as you do it consistently. And what we don't want is going into a marriage suppressing who you are, thinking this is better. It's better that I'm like this and this and this, because who you really are will come out in your marriage, right? So we don't want to suppress who we are. We want to accept who we are and look for that. Of course, we're always looking to better ourselves, right? Don't get me wrong. We're always looking to better ourselves. We're always looking to be better than we were yesterday, last month, last year. But we want to do that consistently, right? And we don't want to overburden ourselves, nor do we want to overburden our spouse. So we want to kind of strike that balance always. Also, I will say, don't only listen to what others tell you need, right? When we're in the space of getting married, we take advice from our elders, which is something I'm going to bring up in a little while. And oftentimes our loved ones, our parents, our siblings, our elders, they will think that they know what we need. They will think that they know what's best for us. And oftentimes maybe they're projecting. They're projecting their own wants or needs or wishes on you. And so you want to be aware of their projection, right? And yes, we should listen to our elders. We should take their advice, but be aware if they're maybe thinking something about yourself that isn't true. Maybe they don't know who you really are. And this can happen, right? Like maybe you haven't completely shared what it is that you want with your life, and so they're just going off what they know of you. So of course, it is good to listen to our elders, but don't only listen to what others tell you need, because somebody might say, well, you need to marry somebody with XYZ salary, or you need to marry someone with this job, or you need to marry someone who has studied this much in deen. And all of those things are great if that's what you want and that's what you need. So just, that's another thing to be aware of. Okay, so and the last, area of self-exploration is knowing your faults. And this is an important aspect of marriage, is taking the time to explore areas of yourself that need to be improved. And this is constantly happening in marriage all the time. So you're not going to be completely done with it by the time you're married, of course not. But getting that, starting on that path and knowing maybe these are the things that I was exposed to growing up, or these were the lessons of love that I was given growing up, and this is how I understand love to be. And you can explore a happy, content childhood, and you can explore a contentious childhood. All of those things play into who you are, right? And so knowing where your faults lie, and this can be done through therapy, of course. I'm not gonna, say therapy is for everyone all the time, although I think therapy is great, obviously. But therapy is a great way to explore, who you are and where your faults lie. Self-exploration, do some reading, do some exercises, learn about your family, learn about how you grew up, learn about what you believe love to be and how you perceive love. Those are important things that you can do on your own. And talking to those who know you, talking to maybe people who you grew up with or people who understand you really well, and say, what are the things that I struggle with? What are the things that I need to improve on before I get married? Some examples are, identifying potential problem areas in your life. You could, maybe your attitudes about religion, whether for good or for bad. Could it be a problem in your marriage when you get married? Your communication style, this is huge, right? How we communicate is integral in our relationships. And we learn communication from how we grow up, right? So really taking a look at your parents' communication style or whoever raised you, and how did they communicate with you? What did you learn about communication? And what do you need to learn about communication to move on? And communication is something that's really, really easy to learn, but you have to be willing to learn it, right? So, identifying your communication style, identifying your level of patience or your anger. Is that something you need to work on? Is it something you need to improve on? Identifying your attitudes about finances. Those are huge in marriage, right? Like, is it comfortable for me to talk about money? Do I understand money? Do I need to work on my knowledge of money? Do I need, whatever it is, right? These are things that you need to explore for yourself before, looking into getting married. Your family. Is your family a potential problem area? Do you know something about your family that's going to, come out in your marriage? For example, do you know that when you get married, your parents have to live with you? Like, that is something that's an expectation. Is that something you need to identify, accept, and convey to your spouse? Right? These are important areas to really think about. And maybe your friends. Could your friends be a problem? Could your friends be a help in your relationship? Just exploring that and really thinking about that and knowing these. And of course, there's many, many more. But knowing these things about yourself can really help in your marriage. And then also learning about yourself through others. So we take, like I was saying before, we take from our elders the experience of those closest to us who have experienced things when we ourselves are maybe inexperienced. So talking to our parents, talking to our grandparents, talking to siblings who might have been married or married for a while. And we do this in areas in our life, right? Like athletes talk to their coaches, students talk to their teachers, residents talk with their attendings, if they're physicians. Like we talk with those who have maybe experienced what we're about to experience and ask them, what should I know? What should I work on? What are areas that I need to improve on? What are things that I need to study? And not rejecting the knowledge of others, right? Like our religion is a religion of mashwara. Our way of life is a way of life of taking consultation with others. And so that's not a bad thing to say, like, tell me about what I need to know, right? And taking in those lessons as well. And inshallah, that will help, in all of our marriages, inshallah. I also wanted to talk really quickly about the Prophet ﷺ and how he got his daughters married. So as we know, he had 4 daughters, right? Zainab radiallahu anha, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima radiallahu anhunna. And each of them married a different type of person because of his ﷺ knowledge of them as their father, right? So if you look at all of their marriages, they were different. And he knew, and we can speculate and think that he knew as their father what they needed and what was to their benefit. So if we look at Zainab radiallahu anha, she was married to Abu al-As, and that marriage happened before Islam. And what we know about him is he was a person of reflection. He was a person of deep thought, and he identified this person as being a good spouse for his for his daughter. Excuse me. And later on, this comes into play much later on in their lives. When they eventually they become separated for a while, and when they become reunited before her death, that he was always showing love and respect for her. And the Prophet ﷺ is later quoted as saying that he has a lot of respect for Abu As, radiallahu anhu. So that that is there, his knowledge of her as her father. And then we look at, Kulthum and Ruqayya, radiallahu anhuma, that they were both married to Uthman, radiallahu anhu. And there was benefit in that for them as well. And the Prophet loved Uthman as his son-in-law. So much so that when one daughter passed away, he had the other marry Uthman because he loved something about him, something about the way maybe he treated his daughters. Maybe he recognized a need in his daughters to be married to someone like Uthman. And then we look at Fatima, radiallahu anha, and she was married to Ali, radiallahu anha. But before she got married to Ali, the Prophet received many marriage proposals for her from Abu Bakr radiallahu anha and Umar radiallahu anha. And he rejected those, knowing that Ali was the best person for her. And we know the Prophet's relationship with Fatima radiallahu anha, where he says, Fatima minni, that she is from me, and how much he loved and revered her. When she would walk in a room, he would get up and give her his place of sitting, and that she resembled him the most. Their relationship was very deep, and he chose Ali radiallahu anha because of his knowledge of his daughter. He Abu Bakr being who he was and being wealthy, or Umar being who he was, he said those two are not good for my daughter, and he waited for Ali, also knowing that she had a tough life, that they were always struggling, that she had to work very, very, very hard, and that there were times when they were unhappy with each other or they had difficulties, and he went into that knowingly, and he assisted them in their marriage, right? Knowing, this is what my daughter's like, this is what Ali was like, and there are a lot of things we don't know about the interactions between them, but he, as their father, took his knowledge of them and helped them to get married. So this is, going back to the previous slide, talking about, taking mashwara and learning from those before us, and understanding that our parents or our people who raised us or our siblings might know things about ourselves that we don't know, right? And really taking that advice from them. And so before I let you guys go, I thought maybe I would just talk about the top 5 things I wish I knew before getting married. And this is, very personal. And this is just my own experience, having been married for as long as I have. Alhamdulillah, that, marriage is 2 families marrying each other. That marriage is really not just you and the person you're marrying, but your family is coming together as well. And your families are a very, very, very important aspect of your marriage. And so understanding that and the things that can play out in your marriage because of that. And also the financial responsibilities of marriage, not only with your own finances, but with having kids and taking care of family members and all of those things, being fully aware of that and learning more about that is really important. and the role that my family of origin plays in my current marriage. So how I grew up, the processes that I saw growing up, the relationships that I saw play out in front of me, and how that affects my marriage is so important. At least understanding that, and learning more about it while I got married was very important. Also, that pop culture, in whatever form, is not a reliable source with regards to love, intimacy, and daily life. And I'll add into that social media now. I didn't have social media when I got married, but that is not, whatever we see in those mediums, in those forms, is not a reliable source. We look at real life as a reliable source. We look at our parents or people around us, or what we read in the seerah of the prophets. Those are real, reliable sources of what life is really like. And if we only rely on pop culture and social media, we're going to be disappointed when we get in our marriages, because you have ups and downs. You have hard times and good times. And then the last is that the first year of marriage is hard. Like, you think, oh, it's going to be great. Like, we're going to be on the honeymoon stage forever. And yes, the honeymoon stage is there, and that's wonderful. But you also struggle, and that's okay. So I guess maybe I should add into that. That's okay, right? The first year of marriage is difficult and a struggle, but it's okay that it is that way, because it helps you to learn more about yourself and your spouse. So Jazakallah khairan for your attention. Inshallah, this was beneficial to all of you. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Wow, subhanAllah, jazakallah khair, Ustada Sana. That was amazing, especially about the love languages. I find that to be so interesting, like navigating between myself, my spouse, but also my children. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Let's move forward. I know we're very short on time because we want to squeeze in as many question and answers as possible. Our next speaker, Dr. Human Kishvarzi. Mashallah, so much to say about Dr. Human, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. Dr. Human Keshavarzi is a licensed psychotherapist. He practices in the state of Illinois. He holds a doctorate of clinical psychology, and he is currently a visiting scholar at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, Turkey, where he is currently residing with his family temporarily. He's also an adjunct professor at American Islamic College and an instructor at Islamic Online University. He, mashallah, has authored so many published many academic papers in academic journals. After moving to Chicago, Dr. Human formerly studied at Dar es Salaam for 4 years, later transferring to Dar al-Qasim, where he continued his higher Islamic education. So let's bring on Dr. Human. There he is. Okay, alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Human.
Walaikum salam.
How are you?
Good, alhamdulillah. Doing well. Jazakallah khair.
So we will pass this on to you, inshallah.
Is my voice coming over okay? Can you also see the screen? Just one technology check.
Yeah, so we can hear you.
Okay.
I think we will be fixing up the slides.
Okay. Oh, right, because I got to go and present her.
Right.
So,
okay, perfect. We can see it.
Just this. I'm not able to see the camera for some reason when I do this.
Oh.
So I share the screen. You can see the screen currently.
We can see the screen. We can also see you, but in presenter mode. So we can see all your slides.
Maybe can we have Abdullah? Do you want to share the screen if that's okay? Because I can't seem to get my screen to show the StreamYard at the same time. For some reason, it just takes over both of my screens.
Okay, yeah, Abdullah's on it right now.
Okay. All right, so with that, maybe I'll just go ahead and sort of get started with a little bit of introductions. just to make use of my time. And Abdullah, when you get in, inshallah, just jump right into the second slide, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وبعد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu from Istanbul, as Asiya mentioned. I'm in my office in Istanbul, and as she said, temporarily, so not to raise any anxieties. We'll be coming back to the national headquarters, inshallah, in a year or so, here to build some bridges and work on some academic projects, as Sister Asiya has mentioned. So now talking about our topic at hand with the premarital, and Jazakumullah khair to Sana, she really kind of laid some foundations for me to be able to get into. Why is it important for us to really think about premarital considerations and things that we should know before getting married? Well, as you'll see in the statistics soon, the average American, in the American population, typically now we have upwards of one third to half of the population, half of married couples end up getting in a divorce. Now, one might say, well, that doesn't necessarily reflect the Muslim population. What's the data on Muslims? The Muslim population, one estimate is reported to be about 32%, which is a national estimate. Right, and then another one, which is more localized to Northern California, is 21%. But the interesting thing that I want to draw our attention to is that of the question in our minds is those people who don't get divorced, right, the other 50% of the general population, or let's say the other 65 to 80%, based upon the different studies we're looking at with the Muslim population, what happens to them? The remainder is our assumption that they are all satisfied, and the reality is that they're a significant proportion of them are not. Of the general average population, 50% of those who remain married, right, the other 50% of the average population are dissatisfied with their marriages. The let's say 69%, right, if we're going with the 31 percent marker for the estimate by Yunus in 2000, he says that so then 68% of those couples, right, have report that they have significantly negative interactions. And these are Muslim couples, by the way. So these latter two statistics are Muslim couples. And 56% of them report that they've had at least one moderate to major issue in their marriages. Okay, so that's alarming. Now, just to kind of drive the point home, we're looking at upwards of 50 to 75% of marriages ending up with either complete failure or significant problems. That raises the degree of importance that we need to pay to premarital considerations. If I were to tell you that 75% of the population is going to catch a life-threatening disease, right? Or if we just look at COVID, right? Like, how common is COVID if we're looking at the data? It is definitely not 50% or 75% of the population, but what have we done? We're looking at researching, understanding, getting vaccinated, taking protective measures, putting on masks. So the question is, when it comes to our marital life, or it comes to a significant portion of our lives, then we need to ensure that we're doing some due diligence before we get married. So that's the point that I want to drive home. Now, here's another interesting data set again, if we go to the next slide, please, Abdullah. If we look at what are the causes of divorce or dissatisfaction among American Muslims, okay? This study shows of 296 couples who have been interviewed, and the most common, by the way, number one, right? The rest of after number one are not in hierarchical order, but number one is in-laws, and women tend to report less satisfaction with the or report in-laws as a greater issue for their marriage than men do. But in-laws seems to be among the most significant problems. family or friends, right? And the other is finances, right? Whether they can agree or disagree on financial issues, differing interests, and conflicting attitudes regarding intimacy and sex. Okay, so these are just some things that we want to keep in mind. And then in the second half of my presentation, when I talk about things to really ask about or look at when you're getting married to somebody, these things will naturally come up and they're connected to this data. So let's go to the next slide, inshallah. So one of the key issues or thoughts that comes up in many people's minds when they're trying to get married, a lot of young people or their parents, right, are thinking about, what do we do? How do we go about doing this? And typically we have two general approaches. One is a very traditionally arranged marriage setup where we have our parents select for us, or we have this other alternative, and there's this huge spectrum in between: love or choice marriages. Okay, and so on the choice, there are two different extremes on this spectrum. Sometimes you get really extreme kind of arranged marriage where there's no choice involved on the part of the child at all. There's a selection by the parents exclusively. The other extreme is these love marriages where the parents or family members may be introduced into the picture later on. And I want to kind of unpackage this a little bit for us to get a better appreciation of where we might want to find ourselves in this process on the spectrum. And you'll quickly notice, if I'm kind of the spiller or the spoiler, would be that we want to be somewhere in between. Okay, and I'm going to unpackage that for us. First of all, let's just take a look at this notion of love marriages, right, and choice marriages. The idea, the theory, I mean, the thing that gets tossed around a lot is that, I can't just marry somebody that I don't know, right? So therefore, the more I know somebody, the better it will yield success for my marriage, right? If that theory is completely true, and generally, by the way, it's true of other things, but for some reason it's not true in marriage. Very interestingly enough, and there's this perhaps, the lack of barakah that comes as a result of disobeying Allah Ta'ala and choosing to adopt your own mechanism, right, of getting married and going sheerly on the basis of your own choosing or getting to know one another. Let's take a look at cohabitation rates. How could you know somebody the best? The best way would be to actually live with them, right? So cohabitation, right? Living with your spouse prior to get married to them, prior to you getting married to them. What we find, data shows that actually marriages that started with cohabitation fare the worst in terms of success of marriage. They have the highest rates of divorce, highest rates of marital satisfaction. It's actually a predictive factor for divorce. Okay, so that kind of throws a wrench into our assumption of the more you get to know somebody, the better it is. Very ironically enough, right, people think choice and love marriages. Well, you know what? I'm going to get arranged marriage, and then how am I going to love this person, right? So I need to find somebody myself in order to fall in love with them. If I fall in love with them, then it will yield long-term love, right? Well, the irony to this is that arranged marriages, right, very traditional arranged marriages, seem to yield higher scores in love in the long term than choice marriages. Right, so this kind of throws off our notion of, when I was doing my clinical training, I actually spoke about this issue in one of our groups with a bunch of colleagues and psychologists who we were talking about the process of marriage, and I mentioned this issue of it's very common practice among Muslim cultures to have these arranged marriages. They found it very unusual, right? How is it that you can get married to somebody that you haven't lived with or that you haven't spent a lot of time with? Well, my question back to them is that, well, if the current process was working, right, the average sort of American dream sort of marriage, Hollywood, Bollywood constructed sort of marital process, then why are we having such a huge failure rate, then it causes us to really question the modality in which we're actually approaching this topic of marriage, right? So we need to take pause and reflect and step back for a moment. So we shouldn't just take it for granted, right? These notions. So let's move on to the next slide, and then this slide so far you may be getting the the sense that I'm advocating for arranged marriages, traditional arranged marriages. Well, now I'm going to take a little bit of a jab at the traditional arranged marriage structure, right? So some of the negative aspects of very extreme traditional arranged marriage structures is that sometimes they're not necessarily religiously oriented, they're very culturally based, right? They introduce a lot of cultural practices and phenomenon into the process. It diminishes choice. So for example, in very extreme scenarios, I mean, this sometimes really baffles my mind and surprises me, right? Some people, approach marriage in a way like they spend a lot more time picking their watermelon, right, than picking the spouse, right? So with a watermelon, what are you doing? I mean, my father would pick, watermelons at the grocery store. I used to go with him, and I used to love watermelons as a child. You pick up the watermelon and tap it, make sure this hollow, looking at the colors at the ends, looking at the roots, looking at the shape, and if it's got these like sugar, scars on them. And he was just basically like short of, bowling it down the grocery aisle to see like which way it slants to be able to determine whether he should buy this watermelon or not, right? Some people pick their watermelons and they spend a lot more time than actually spending time on picking a spouse. Sometimes they just end up, just sort of, blindfold almost process of picking somebody in the family or somebody from back home or somebody that they hear of is just sort of a good person, right? Good people also end up in divorce, by the way, right? And I'm going to get into the factors of a successful marriage. It's not necessarily you're a bad person for getting a divorce. It's just that two good people may not necessarily have a good marriage. And this is where we really want to pay attention on then what leads to a good marriage. And I'm going to get to that. The other thing too is that we take away agency, right? Americans, like if we look back a couple of generations, people in all very conservative sort of traditional arranged marriage structures would be very like love was a bonus, right? I mean, not that they didn't want love, obviously, right? It's very natural that people want to be attracted and love their spouses, but it was much more a function of a social structure and system, right? Two families getting together, which is really important, by the way. Now, I'm not undervaluing that, but the equation of two people clicking was not as critical or crucial. And we have a very changing dynamic now in our society, right? And what's happening in our society is that, it's unprecedented and unheard of across human history that two individuals spend that much time together, right? Historically, people would, have a lot of community involvement and extended family involvement. So this, growth of the nuclear family, and that's a whole different topic for a different day, but it's a reality that we live in, right? That two people really have to work together and manage a family unit, and they have less and less kind of help from their extended family. Therefore, the increasing need for a good match becomes much more relevant in the structure. So let's go to the next slide. So then what's kind of the conclusion then? Because we talked about, well, choice marriages don't necessarily, choice and love marriages, passion marriages lead less satisfaction and love than actually arranged marriages. But we also talked about extreme arranged marriages taking away agency and potentially being flawed as well. So here's an interesting study. We found that South Asian Americans, right? And these are not necessarily Muslims per se, but Americans who are second or third generations of Desis, right, in America, tend to report higher levels of marital satisfaction than both South Asians and the average population, meaning their parents' generation, people who live in India or Pakistan. So South Asian American, and what is the characteristic that ends up leading them to marital satisfaction? It's that South Asian American youth tend to cooperate and consider their family's views while demanding more autonomy than their counterparts in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. This results in the recreation of their culture, leading to positive marital satisfaction rates. So the fusion, the balanced approach, a cooperation with the family, as well as the individual who is concerned here, is the critical factor. The union, the capacity for them to be able to work together to create agency, to select a person who matches and clicks, as well as, somebody who comes from a good family who's going to click and connect as a family unit as well. And to provide increasing degrees of distance away from what? And I'm going to talk about what that is. Go to the next slide, please. And that is a healthy distance away from falling into the well and the trap of being guided by passion and love. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Hubbuka shay'a yu'mi wa yusim," that your love for something blinds and deafens. And this is the very characteristic that ends up leading to marital dissatisfaction, ends up poisoning marriages. Now let's go to the next slide, just to further illustrate this point in case you're not sold. So you need to really make sure that you don't fall into the spell, right? The Disney spell, right? The fairy tale spell of this kind of passions. Why? Because we find, look at this U-shaped curve of marital happiness. Marital happiness here on the left, on this bar, on this graph, is very high at the beginning. But what happens after the honeymooning stage? You have a natural dip in marital satisfaction. And then the next dip is after raising children. Well, here, by the way, this is a generous graph, by the way, giving a honeymoon period of 2 to 3 years, mashallah. Most people don't have that long of honeymoon experiences. If you do shukr, right? It's a gift, mashallah. You have a wonderful, enjoy that time. But what happens? This and psychologists kind of break down love into, there's different categorizations, but they talk about passionate love and they talk about companionate love, which I'm going to get into, right? Like the Quran says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مُّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, right? That from the signs of Allah Ta'ala is that He created from amongst yourself spouse so that you may dwell in tranquility with them, and that He created love, muwaddah, right? Love, and what? The second feature becomes really important, and rahmah, right? Compassion, or we can even talk about companionship. And I'm going to get into that. How do we get into this companionship? Because after the honeymoon stage, this, ishq, or right, as we call it in Arabic or in Turkish or in Farsi or Urdu, this period of time in which there's this hot, passionate love. Once the spell wears off, then stress comes about. What is it? What is it that makes us have this reduction in marital satisfaction? And how, if we could, can we control this dip? And you can. You can control the degree of a dip. Now, the inevitability is that you will have a dip. And this is usually after the 1 year or 2 year mark is the first itch for divorce in marriage. Most marriages many marriages rather, end up in a divorce after the honeymoon period is done, 1 to 3 years. The second itch is after children, right? Or like the 5-year itch mark, right? And so what is it that is going to protect us from this dip? And that is the real question that we want to answer. The key is for us to be able to make sure we control this dip. Because if you fall really hard, right, you're going to have a difficult time getting back up. But if you can moderate the dip, then you'll have a much better recovery rate. Now let's get to the next slide and unpackage what is it that is going to control the dip? Well, the key factor, the number one factor, right, to keep in mind is that opposites do not attract, contrary to the myth out there, right? Opposites may attract in the beginning. Okay? For example, an introvert and extrovert get together. So the introvert is swept off their feet by the extrovert, right? They are, very, taken aback or, excited or finds exciting the extroversion. Like that's possibly what causes the individual to, go over to their introverted spouse and strike a conversation with them, bring up exciting things. And this is exciting for the introvert at the beginning. The very interesting thing is that these very factors that in the beginning that were opposites, that actually attracted people in the beginning, couples report that later in life, this is the very same traits that they end up hating in their spouse. So for example, the introvert later on, 5 years, 10 years down the road, you have children, and then is wondering, why do you have to be social? Why do you have to go to parties all the time? Why do we have to entertain guests all the time? Why do we always have to go out? I just want to have a calm, relaxed, and quiet, family life, right? So this is an example of how opposites do not attract. The anecdote for you to keep in mind is this. Who is the best person for you to marry? Let's answer this question. Who is the best person for you to marry? Asia, do you want to chime in if you're still there? What do you think? Let's kind of ask we can't ask the audience. We have a lot of people here, mashallah. But let's ask Asia. What do you think? You're married, mashallah, you got children, so who would be the most ideal candidate for you, for a person to marry?
To answer this, it's a very trick question because I wouldn't say someone that's exactly like me. I don't think I would probably get along too well with someone that's just like me. So someone that's not even an opposite. So I don't even know, actually. You can answer that question better.
All right. So maybe you're being very, very modest, or that you're, there are certain features about yourself that you're struggling with. Not to out you, but the most people, right? They actually would. For most people, the perfect spouse for them is themselves. Okay. If a person had the opposite gendered, person that was their twin, not actual twin, right? That would be pretty, weird, right? But I'm talking about if a person if you could create a spouse for yourself, it would be the exact same person. Why? Well, what absorbs the difference, right? If we go back up to the Abdullah, can you go back to the previous slide? What's going to control this is the distance of difference between the two of you. Okay? Now think about this. The greater the difference, the greater the friction between the spouses. Now, this is why actually arranged marriages end up actually succeeding better than choice marriages, right? Obviously, we talk about the fusion, that's the best case, but the reason why is because you're marrying somebody, oftentimes you're picking for similar culture, similar language, similar family, similar dynamics. Therefore, your norms, right? Like how you do things around the house, your expectations of your spouse, right? Your values, right? Your habits, right? The more similar they are, the less you have to have friction about, because you just end up clicking, right? And so raising children, if you have the same expectations about raising children, if you have the same understanding of gender roles, right, then you have less friction that you have to bridge between each other. So the actual dip is controlled by the degree of distance that you have between each other, because difference creates friction between individuals, right? So now let's talk about this friction. Now go to the next, the next slide after this. So each individual arrives at the marital relationship with an internalized psychological prototype schema of what a relationship should be. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. What do I mean by this? We come in with shoulds in our minds. Okay, so we have an idea in our minds about what intimacy should look like. We have an idea in our minds of what gender roles should look like. We have an idea in our minds of what financial arrangements should look like. We have an idea in our minds about who should be raising the child and the different roles. We have ideas in our minds about extended family interactions and so on and so forth. But the key is that two people have differing ideas that they show up to the marriage with. Now, remember, the more similar these are, the less tension that they will have, right? So go to the next slide. Therefore, we have early on, after the honeymooning phase, the dip, by the way, it's inevitable, the dip, right? The dip is going to be determined by the level of difference and the friction that you have, but also each couple tries to impose, right, their prototypes because there's anxiety. I want this marriage to go in this direction. The other person wants the marriage to go in this direction. Sometimes you have extended families that get involved that try to impose one direction or another. But what you end up having is a tug of war as to how things should be in the household. Who should control finances? Who should do the cooking and cleaning? Who should make a decision making, right? Who should make rules, frequency of how many, social interactions, etc. Go to the next slide, please. And so the process, right? Now look at here on the left. These are the individual differences. It could be your personality and character that differs, your habituated relational norms. So, for example, in your household, you witnessed how marriage is from your parents, and you just internalize those. You may or may not be aware of them. Or your environments of origin from your extended family, or it could be media, it could be TV. But what happens is that you have these competing norms between the two spouses. There's overlap. And again, remember, the degree of overlap between them is going to determine the friction. The more overlap, the less friction. The less overlap, the more friction. Now, I'm not saying that differences is cause for alarm or for a reason to necessarily get a divorce. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that it's definitely going to be more difficult. Okay. And what is a successful marriage? A successful marriage is when both partners, husband and wife together, are able to merge or bridge these differences between them. Okay. So each juncture, each developmental milestone or problem in the relationship, we go to the next slide, creates a fire. It creates friction because you're going to inevitably have differences, right? Because you're not going to marry the same person. They're inevitably going to have differences. Obviously, in our selection, we want to control the degree of difference, but you're going to have different friction at each juncture. The ability to be flexible and to negotiate and to actually create a new norms, okay? New norms, meaning both people are trying to impose their different norms, but what you want to create is new norms. And when you create new norms, the more you are able to successfully navigate each of these flames, the closer you'll be with one another. Now, the absence thereof will create either continuous tension in the relationship and fighting and turmoil, or it will create resentment where people will live like roommates. And I have couples, for example, 50-year-olds will come in, they'll sit in the room, and the degree of tension, they can't even stand one another's presence. And they can't articulate why, because it's just a series of different events over life that has led them further and further apart from one another. Let's go to the next slide. So what ends up happening is, I have this analogy of sketch. You actually, as a couple together, go to the drawing board, okay? The sketch of your marriage in the beginning, post honeymoon stage, is where the real relationship starts, the work starts, is that you start to sketch on the board. Okay. And each stressful event causes you to create new norms and to sketch your marriage together. And it's an evolving dynamic. Those who cannot cooperate will have a very messy image or will have nothing. They'll just live separate lives. But those who are able to cooperate with one another will develop a sketch, and it will only materialize upon death, right? Because you're always having new events. And obviously, when you have, you're married for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, you have less and less you disagree upon, a lot more automatics. This is where you have stability in your marriage, consistency, predictability, because you have common understandings between one another that you have articulated or that you have merged. Go to the next slide, please. So but the key is that you have to have flexibility. And by the way, I also talk about creating kind of healthy boundaries around you and your spouse to differentiate and individuate from your families. Why? And don't tell your families everything, because the more you tell them, right, about your relationship, the more you open yourself up to influence from both sides. And both sides will do what? They will try to replicate what's normal for them in their households in your marriage. Well, that's not going to work, is it? Because you have two different households that are trying to impose two different systems in a new system. That's why creating your own system becomes very, very important. So families need to allow for children, their children, or adult children here, to have the stress and the tension in order to promote growth. Without pain, with no pain, no gain. You have to have the pain in order to grow. And for them to encourage them to be able to converse and work with one another to solve their problems. Go to the next slide. Very important to ensure flexibility, but also that the differences the losses are equitably distributed, meaning that you are, a good deal in business is one in which both parties lose. What does that mean? That means that you both make compromises. And it's not 50-50. So this is very important. It's not about equality. And this is a very false notion that is actually poisonous to marriages. And marital research, if you look at the data, absolutely supports the notion that equality in marriage is actually detrimental to the relationship. Rather, we don't want equality, we want equity. Equity. And in Islam nurtures equitable distribution. We don't want sameness. Genders are not the same. People are not the same. So we don't treat everybody exactly the same. So what's an example of this? Well, one person, they may agree upon the fact that one person does most of the working, or that one person, even if both of them work, or one person is the one responsible for financial management, right? Because they're better at it. And the other person is responsible for other aspects. Could be the household, could be school, could be children, right? It could be 70-30 in one domain. It could be, 80-20. But the key is that it should be equitable. The distribution equalizes in the end. Both people feel like they're carrying their weight. Another example is losses are equitable. What do I mean by that? That, for example, one person says that, that for my spouse, I'm introverted, they're extroverted. They need a lot of social stimulation. So they always want people to visit the house, right? So that's a need for them. And for me, it's annoying, but this isn't a battle I'm worth winning for me. Like, I would rather just give this up and pass the floor to them and let them have their need taken care of. So therefore, I give way, I give influence, and I let them win here, right? Win, so to speak. In converse, my spouse says, look, let's just keep that slide. He says, look, you know what, keeping the house a particular way in terms of the design, the household, the structure of it is really important and need for that person, less of a need for me. And therefore they give that up. And in the end, they both feel like they're giving things up and there's equitable distribution. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through the characteristics to look for, inshallah, in a marriage. So now this is more of the selection phase. First of all, let's go to the next slide. Right, this is now when you're coming to the marriage. First of all, it's very important, right, to, at the beginning of your marriage, to be very investigative and critical. You know, there's a saying in Arabic, "Inna min al-hadri su' al-dhann," that from making good decisions, or "Inna min al-tadbir su' al-dhann," right? That from making good decisions or planning, or from being cautious, that you should be critically minded, like evaluate somebody critically. Okay, don't say overlook, oh, all their faults, oh, everything will be great. No, once you get married, then you want to have husn dhann, because it's sealed, over and done. The package is finished, right? There's a bad analogy. We could go to the market and you're like, do your homework before you buy a commodity. But once you buy it, don't have regrets. Don't think back, oh, I could have bought that, I could have bought this, or I should have looked at it. No, it's done. You have to live with it. You have to make the best of your experience that you have. And also, taqdeer is sealed, right? At that moment, right? Allah Ta'ala willed that for you. So what are the features that we want to look for and be critical at the beginning? Marry for taqwa, right? This is in accordance with the hadith. Go to the next slide, please. Why is taqwa really important? Because, let's be real, you're not always going to have fond feelings for your spouse. There are moments when you will hate your spouse, right? Reality check. This is marriage. This is reality. You will hate your spouse on occasion. But what will stop you from overstepping the limit? What will make sure that you still give them their rights? Okay, it's taqwa. It's knowing that Allah Ta'ala is there. What will make that person stop holding their grudge at a maximum of 3 days because they want to do ri'ayah, or they want to honor the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where they don't hold a grudge for more than 3 days, right? It produces more selflessness as well. So taqwa becomes important. This is why in the khutbah of marriage, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون إلى آخره. That's the khutbah. The khutbah, we have this whole emphasis is all centered around taqwa. Next, let's go to the next slide. Don't expect change. There's a saying in Arabic, كل شيء يرجع إلى أصله, or we can say كل نفس يرجع إلى أصله, right? Or كل إنسان, that everything reverts back to its old norms. Okay, do not make a project to change somebody. I'm going to marry my project and I'm going to try to design or this person's got a lot of potential. They're missing some key features. So I want to, it's like buying a car and putting rims on it, right? I don't like the rims, I'll just change them out. No, this is a person, it's a human being, right? You have to accept them as they are. The only exception is if they're in process, meaning they have a strong personal motivation to change an aspect of themselves that they independently wanted to change before meeting you. But if they're going to make the change for you, it's not going to last anymore. That motivation is very flimsy and it will fall apart. Let's go to the next slide. So selecting without dating. I mean, people will say, okay, well, how do you assess somebody, to get married? Well, I'm a psychologist, so we assess people all the time, and we have to come up with a conceptualization or diagnosis within a session, within a 45-minute meeting with them, or 2 45-minute meetings with them. So it actually doesn't take a lot, but it does take some paying attention. Okay. So let's go to the next slide and figure out what are those things that you can look out for. The things that you want to ask about are these features, and when you take a picture of the slide, their religiosity, their values, their life goals, and I've underlined, and I would double underline gender roles because it's among the biggest sources of tension that I see in relationships. expectations of marriage, children or no children, type of lifestyle. Do they want a luxury? What's their SES expectation? Are they intending on living like a Sufi, right? And you're not, right? Or vice versa, right? And so you want to make sure that you assess for this. Manner of affection, showing affection, their work ethic, their personality. Do they click with you? Their sense of humor. Let's go to the next slide. So how would we ask these things though, right? Like the number one thing is religion, right? For many people. Well, people say, okay, well, how do I ask this question? Well, first of all, ask open-ended questions. Don't ask closed-ended questions. For example, don't say, do you think religion is important in the relationship? Yes or no. Obviously, it's a yes or no answer. They'll obviously say yes. But even if you have an open-ended question, make sure you are not asking a quote-unquote right answer, one that has a right answer. Give you an example. Here's an incorrect question. Can you tell me about how religion factors into your ideas of marriage? What's the obvious response here? The obvious response is that it is the most integral factor of marriage, right? That we want to please Allah and attain Jannah. What person who is looking for another Muslim, right, is not going to pick that answer, right? So what can we ask instead? Let's go to the next slide. Well, first of all, you don't always need to ask. You can gauge this through other indicators, and sometimes these are more powerful indicators. To what extent does this come up in your conversation or as a priority? When you ask about things like what does marriage mean to you? Does religion come up as a natural response? When asking about life goals, does religion come up? Do they talk a lot about Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? Go to the next slide. But if you were to ask, right? Let's take gender roles, for example. An example of a bad question would be, how do you think a woman should be treated by her husband? What's the obvious response? She should be treated like a queen. She should be, taken care of, given her needs and wants and given attention and love and treat gently, etc. That's the obvious answer, right? Instead, we might ask, what are your expectations in spouse? What is your ideal spouse? Okay. So these open the door for them to ask more about it. How might you ask them what else to look for? Let's take a look at life goals, lifestyle. One way that I like to do this is I tell people in premarital counseling, I tell them to give me a projection into 10 years of the marriage, right? I say, paint me a picture. Let's imagine that we are married 10 years down the road. What is a day in the life of our marriage look like? What time do we wake up? Where do we wake up? What city are we living in? Are we living in the Muslim world? Living in the USA? In which city in the USA? Who's getting up? Do we have children? If so, how many children? Who's getting up to take care of those children? Right? Who's going to work? Who's making breakfast? What time are we coming back? How far do we live from our parents? Right? These are all these specifics that creates this painting of a picture for people to really get a window into the expectations of all these factors that I just talked about actually ends up coming to the surface. So this is a way of doing it. Let's go to the next slide. Actually, let's go to the final slide. Finally, right, after saying all of this, right, know that you can't predict everything, right? You want to do your due diligence, just like, ad-dinu bayna al-khawfi wa raja, between fear and hope, anxiety and having hope in Allah Ta'ala, right? So you can't control everything. Fear of having a bad marriage induces you to do your work, do your homework, and to prepare. But then you have hope. You don't want to be obsessive about it either. But you want to consider that there will be inevitable differences and that marriage is hard work. And one of the things to really keep in mind is that the features of successful marriages, as I said earlier, is that one of the key features of successful marriages is that they keep their negative thoughts of their spouses from overwhelming their positive ones. Okay, the Quran says, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ijtanibu kathiran min adh-dhann inna ba'da adh-dhanni ithm." Right? Refrain from excessive negative thinking or su'al dhann about people, for some of these can be evil. Right? And once a marriage is done, don't have these thoughts of, oh, I could have done better. As the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says, لو كنت فعلت كذا وكذا لا تقل لو كنت فعلت كذا وكذا. If I had done this or that. ولكن قل ما شاء قدر الله ما شاء فعل. That Allah willed what He wanted, then approach how you can approach this positively and repair and work on your relationship. So that's what I'll conclude with, inshallah, and we can transition into the Q&A. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Human. That was amazing. Actually, as a person who's been married for many years, I can take a lot of those points and implement them into my own marriage.
Did I sell you on the notion of similarities, or not?
I was actually pretty shocked because I didn't think. I'll be honest. I didn't want to sound conceited by saying I would like to marry someone like myself, but that's great. I didn't think about it.
I asked the question that would be, what could you culturally frowned upon to give the answer to, right?
Right. I'm hoping that many people would respond the same way.
It's also the healthy answer. People should, right, think that, look at their deficiencies, right, and think that, I want somebody better than myself. I want somebody who can improve me, who can help me identify my flaws, so there's definitely, a role for that, and keeping that perspective actually is a very important feature of a successful marriage as well.
Absolutely. So let's get on to some questions. For those of you who are asking, yes, this program is recorded. You can tune in later on, share this with your family and friends who are looking to get married or who are already married, like myself, because I benefited quite a bit from this. Let's see. Okay. So how can one make a marriage a form of worship and become close to Allah? Please, can you provide practical examples? Sana, would you like to take this? I think this was asked when you were speaking.
Sure. So I guess the answer that I'm thinking is that worship doesn't have to be in the form of ritual or ibadah, as we're thinking that in like prayer or fasting or hajj, that's worship, but worship is also in our daily activities and what we do based on our intention. So if I have the intention that I'm serving Allah through this marriage, that's enough to make it an act of worship and to make it something that can gain ajr for us. So it's really just in your intention that I'm doing this to make my Lord happy. I'm doing this to fulfill my husband's rights, or I'm doing this to take care of somebody else. And there's many, many intentions that you can have. Intentions don't have to be just one. But then to go further than that, you can make your marriage, and I guess this is a really good thing to do, is to make your marriage centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so to do things together as a couple to get closer to Allah, that's also a beautiful thing you can do if your marriage is oriented in that way. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Juan?
Yeah, there's just to also give an example from one of my cases. So a husband is kind of has done something to offend and upset his wife, and he tries to do these repairs, right, for her. And then what ends up happening is that she remembers this offense and becomes kind of off in her mood. He gets angry and says, I took you out, I bought roses, I bought chocolate, I did this for you. And this is like, you're still holding on to this issue, right? Or your mood is still off. So my recommendation for him was this: let's turn your marriage into an ibadah. How can we do that? And I said, I'm going to give you 2 ayahs that you keep in mind. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal adha. O you who believe, do not destroy or invalidate, nullify your sadaqah, and sadaqah starts with your family, the good things that you do, bil manni wal adha. Man is saying, I did this for you, and wanting recognition or acknowledgement for it. Second thing is being harsh or insulting or offensive, okay, with an individual, right? And then I said, so then he said, okay, so then how should I respond? I said, so he really took it to heart, by the way. He's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, like, I'm invalidating the good that I did. I said, look, it takes a lot of effort to take her out. It takes a lot of effort to, like, apologize. It takes a lot of effort to write her a note and letter and to try to fix and heal it, right? But you just destroyed it like that in 30 seconds. It takes a lot to build something, very easy to knock it down, right? So I said, don't knock it down and invalidate it. That's number one. Second, ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. That evil and good are not the same. So repel evil with good. Actually, with ahsan. So what you would think to do for somebody that was kind, ahsan would be to do better than that. Actually, to go above and beyond. So that's even harder. Like, you don't want to do anything for your spouse when you're mad at them, right? So then so just do good. That would be the least level. Ahsan would be go above and beyond, right? وَاعْفُ عَنْ مَنْ ظَلَمَكَ أَعْطِ مَنْ حَرَمَكَ. The Prophet ﷺ said, right? Do good to the one who does harm to you, right? Forgive the one who has done wrong to you, okay? So these are really nice, but actually, one of my teachers used to say, a person can be a waliullah just as a result of their marriage, a saint, right? He reached the station of sainthood. Why? Because it's very easy to go outside and tolerate people and be nice with them, right? But it's very difficult when you have to, like, be with that person all the time, right? I mean, think about it. Why there's a hikmah in having 3 days of having a guest over at your house. Why? After 3 days, it's annoying, right? You want to get on with your life. How much can you be kind, make small talk, get dressed up, sit with them, listen to everything, have service, and be cordial. After a while, you start to leak, right? Or reek, right? Of your, like, shortcomings or your irritations or irritabilities. Now imagine being with somebody lifelong and doing that. You're hosting each other forever, right? That's not an easy task. That means that you have to create an environment in which both of you are going to be able to get along with each other, but ultimately get to Allah Ta'ala, right? There is a story. I'll just share this just as a kind of a comical thing. So there is somebody who a sheikh, right? And he used to, like, have all these karamat, right? And he would, like, get on and every time he used to go out, his people would be like, oh, this guy's like the biggest sheikh, he's amazing, right? And they used to revere him. Everybody could come and kiss his hands and sit, like, with a lot of adab in front of him. Then he goes home and he says to his wife, woman, like, I go outside and everybody has all of this respect for me, but, like, every time I come home, you're just nagging and critical, or, like, I get no regard from you. And then he's like, I'm going to show you, okay? I'm going to show you my status. So he puts out a sajjada, a prayer rug. He gets on it. He starts Allahu Akbar. And then he starts floating while he's praying, okay? And then his wife looks at him, and there's somebody next to her, and he starts flying around the house, right? Oh, by the way, I don't know if there's a real tale, it's just sort of an anecdote. It could be reality. We do believe in karamat for sure, right? But she looks at him and she says, and then he stops, and then after he says, so what do you think about that? She's like, even when you're flying, you can't fly correct. You're flying crooked, So your spouse will see your flaws and they will point them out to you. Don't look at it as a bad thing. Look at it as an opportunity, right? Because when you go outside, people will compliment you. People won't tell you things to your face. But when you go home, Your spouse may be a little bit critical with you sometimes, or you might leak some of your spiritual illnesses and flaws within the household, and then that'll be pointed out to you. So these are opportunities of being able to uh, um, you know elevate spiritually in the context of marriage.
Jazakallah khair for that one. Um, Next question is by Ghayur Arshad. His question is there any value in investigating personality types when looking for a future spouse? Example is 16 personalities, Big Five, etc. Dr. Human, you want to start with this one?
Sure. I mean, we use it at Khalil Center with the pre-marital, not the 16 personalities factor, but we use a big five, which is a Neo-Pi R, which is actually very useful. And it stimulates a lot of good conversation. Actually, you can find it online for free. And I would recommend that they just email each other the link and then email your outcomes. But the condition is you have to tell each other to be completely truthful and honest. And if you want to use it for premarital counseling with a third party, like Khalil Center, for example, then that's a great opportunity to be able to create the floor to be able to speak about it. It creates a lot of stimulation for talking about differences, introversion, extroversion, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and different needs that come up and styles of interacting.
Sana, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. I think it can be really helpful, and I do use it in couples work. Um, just understanding that it's not a hard and fast rule that these are your personalities, but it's an idea or something that you may be inclined towards. The 16 personalities is another version of the MBTI, so it is helpful. It's important to know, or it can be helpful. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Um, the next question is by Sister Rafia of Tab. How to find about the person if they are not lying and have a habit of deceiving people while you also do not want to spend long time, like months, in meeting them. Sada Sana?
Sorry, my computer is doing something. How to find out about a person if they're not lying and have a habit of deceiving people. I think that when it comes to finding out about someone, you have to do the best you can and then rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why we have things like istikhara, in which you are asking for Allah's guidance as well. The best thing you can do, between yourself and that person, is to ask that person questions, as Dr. Kuman talked about, and then also find out about them through asking people who know them, and really asking, people who would be objective, who wouldn't really have any sort of I don't know, like, if you get married or not, it doesn't affect them. They just really want the best for you and for them. And that can be very helpful, but also really knowing that you don't know someone until you live with them. So you do istikhara and you have an open mind. You find out the best you can, you ask questions, and then you leave it up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if something happens, then you take that when it comes. But and understand that everything is the qadr, is your qadr, is what Allah wrote for you. And moving forward when that happens. Inshallah, it doesn't though.
Dr. Human, would you like to add on to that?
No, I would agree entirely.
Okay. The next question by Jehan Hudla. What would you look for in a spouse as just a companion? And I feel there is not enough information for Muslim women like myself or resources to find a spouse. Whoever would like to take that one.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What would you look for in a spouse as just a companion? Like, if I understand it, if you're looking for friendship, like how do you find that in a marriage? I think that's what I understand. That I think that's where what Dr. Human was talking about kind of comes in, that finding your compatibility, finding that you have things in common, that you things that you like to do, to that are similar, but also recognizing that sometimes you have to work a little bit in a marriage to like each other's likes. So, for example, my husband is really into ice hockey, and I could care less about ice hockey, but I will learn more about it because he likes it, and vice versa. Just to have things in common that you can then connect on. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Human?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think I just echo that and just say that, you know, I think companionship is built upon hard work, meaning that companionship is built by virtue of sacrifice, and individuals who sacrifice one another have great appreciation for one another, right? And companionship entails that you have a common journey together that you identify, and that you are assisting one another on that journey. And so that's what I would, envision as, true companionship, right? Um, so that's the only thing that was. And then the other thing is that recognize that your interests and all of your needs are not going to be met by one spouse, by one person. And I think this is also flawed reasoning sometimes. Everybody puts their eggs in one basket to get all of their needs out of one relationship, and that overwhelms the system. So our relationships, especially in the context of nuclear family structures, we end up, the spouse serves as your friend, as your teacher, as your, like, colleague, as your financial advisor, as everything, and it becomes a confidant, and it overwhelms the system. And you have to recognize that not all of your needs are going to be met through the spouse, for they may not be able to meet some of your needs. For example, if somebody is not inherently empathic, somebody inherently cannot understand or appreciate certain perspectives of yours, somebody cannot provide emotional connection with you in the way that you want it. They can try. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be trying, right? That's a process, but there's a ceiling on that because it may not necessarily happen very naturally. One needs to sometimes find other ways of being able to get that satiated, right? It may be through engagement with the community, it may be through friends, it may be through family, it may be through, extracurriculars and these sorts of things. And the less we demand of the relationship, and the more we put in and less we demand out of it, will engender, a better experience for everybody. It's a paradox, right? It's a paradox. Like, you'll get more out of your companionship the less you demand of it, right? And you can think about demanding friends, right? The more they demand of you, how friendly do you want to be with them any longer, right? Is sort of like feel overstimulated, and you just kind of want to, you know, you sort of create some distance between yourself and them.
Okay. Um, it seems that Sister Jahan had another question. There was a second part to this. It was, what recommendations would you give for someone who is older and has already been married and has grown children to get married, remarried? Sister Sadasana, can you?
I guess that was the first part of the question from before. I don't know if I know enough to have recommendations for that. I think it's important to know what your needs and wants are, like I was kind of talking about. So if this is the stage of life that you're at, and that's what you need, then you're clear about that with yourself and the person you're looking for, and then asking for help for that within the community or within people that's kind of what you're looking for. I don't know. I think that's what I have about that. Do you have anything to add?
This next question: do you recommend getting married before financial stability? What is some advice for those that marry young? And there's another question that's very similar. May you give some advice on marrying while still being a university student? So basically, marrying young. Who
So
would like to take this one?
I love that somebody asked this question because it's a really important and critical one. I was married at 19, alhamdulillah, and I've been married for about 17 years, alhamdulillah. Now, again, I'm speaking partially from my personal experience and partially from, my work with clients and observation, anecdotal evidence, that the younger you marry, the better, with some caveats, okay, with some very important caveats. And that is related to this financial stability issue. Contrary to the idea that people will mature, will need to be mature before they get married, sometimes responsibility forces that maturity. Okay, so you get married, you're thinking about marriage early on, you're thinking about, I'm not going to be messing around with life, it's time for me to get some work done. Like that it dawns upon you that I have responsibility, that it dawns upon you that I may have children, it dawns upon you that we need to, run a household, right? Second thing is that growing up and sacrificing and building together rather than being built and then coming and discussing and negotiating, is building together. And especially early stages, you're much more malleable, but it's also a little bit risky, right? This is where similarities and good mentorship and support is the caveat, is extremely, extremely critical to have support around you. Financial number one, right, of the most important of them would be that your family members would support you. If we both have teenage children now, right? Myself, son, and Asi as well, right? And so you guys are probably thinking about this as they grow older. I would love all of my children, right? And I would try to support them getting married young, while they're in university. However, it needs to be support from the family. They need to be involved and they need to be able to create accommodations. They don't have to live with you, but you need to support them financially enough that they can sustain themselves and keep concentration on their studies, right? And you'll find that once you conquer one of the biggest milestones that people are like thinking about, right, and preparing for, you find that you all of a sudden have a lot of clarity of mind. You're like, okay, this is done. Now, like, I can focus on my studies. I can focus on developing my life rather than thinking about when is marriage going to happen, right? And it creates a sense of responsibility. And there's a lot more I could say about this, and I'll try to, stop here. But maybe one more thing. The other thing is biology, right? That Allah Ta'ala, like, we don't date, right? Like, the Christian world has solved this problem. You know how they've solved it? They said, we're going to abandon no sex before marriage kind of philosophies, okay? We're just going to embrace, right? Like, we've created a social structure in which people get married after they're 25, at least. Now we're going into the late 20s and early 30s, and sometimes even later than that. We're going to do that. Then what ends up happening is that, well, human beings are biological. What should they do? Should they be celibate, like, forever, never talk to the opposite gender ever? Frankly, that doesn't happen. It's just not realistic, right? So if you as a parent is expecting them not to ever look or talk with the opposite gender, then you've sort of created a bad situation for yourself. So rather than that, biologically, women are more likely to conceive and have healthier children younger, right? And males, right, are more likely to be able to basically concentrate, right, in life, regular life, through early marriage and engender a sense of responsibility. You have all of these adult male children, right? They're emotionally immature. because they have no sense of responsibility until they hit about 35 years old, right? And so if you create this, elongated adolescence, right, then how do you expect men to be men after they've been children in their adulthood for like half their lives, right? And so this is where that sense of responsibility, and it just is reversed biologically. Islam is very consistent with human nature. Therefore, the recommendation is to marry young, right? And perhaps in our time, I'm suggesting 13, 14, 15 years old, but as they start to get into their later adolescence, around college, perhaps after high school and into the early college years, we really want to be thinking about helping them, match at this point.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I know we're very short on time. I'm sorry. I'm trying to like skim through these questions. The next question.
Anything to add to that?
Oh, sorry, Sana, would you like to add to that? Sorry.
No, I completely agree with everything you said.
Let's see for another question. By Fizz Pop. Assalamu alaikum. What do you advise if parents are against a marriage between two adults in their mid-20s who want to marry? They fit each other's religious criteria and other criteria as well.
So I think I would just say I'm really sorry if that's happening to you. It's a really tough situation to be in. Kind of going back to what I was saying in my presentation, that your parents or your whoever raised you or is in your life, their opinions are very important. Keeping in mind that when you do get married, they do play an integral role in your relationship as well, and you don't want to get into a contentious situation in which you might be like going against their wishes or doing what they don't want and getting married to someone you feel like works for you. Of course, there's a lot to this situation that I don't know, so I can't give a one answer. But in general, parents, their opinions do matter, and I would say just make a lot of dua for Allah to open their hearts. Try to talk to them, try to understand their point of view. Is there something that they're seeing or they're thinking that maybe you don't see or that you're not thinking about? And then also just the role of istikhara, and that leaving that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and like whatever is best for you. And it really is a tough situation.
Dr. Human, would you like to add to that?
No, it's hard because there's so much context that needs to be unpackaged here, right? To know what the circumstances are. Is there room for degrees of influence with the family? Do they have certain things in their minds that they see as significant red flags that are really critical, important factors that warrants some true investigation? Is just this situation could go in so many different ways, so it's hard to really speak to it without knowing all of the circumstances around it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And this question is, how do you ensure you are being reasonably critical during the search process and not being overly critical? Who would like to take that one?
I think that's a really good question to ask. I think being reflective on yourself, like, am I asking too much or am I looking too much into things? I'm not sure if Dr. Haman mentioned this, but I can't remember, but meeting a couple of times really, or having just a limited amount of interaction in which you ask your questions should be sufficient, should be enough. And if you're taking too long to make this decision, or if there's too many questions, like I have a friend that had a list of 100 or was it 300 questions that she went through. And I was just like, that's way too much. Like somebody can't answer all those questions, or you're never really going to know, like I said before. So being reflective on yourself, asking others, am I being too picky? Am I asking too much? And being mindful of how much time you're taking to make that decision. How many times are we meeting? How many times are we interacting? Is it just becoming too much at that point? I don't know. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Mann?
Yeah, I agree with that. And knowing, again, as you mentioned in your presentation, the distinction between a need and a want, right? Being able to say, look, these are deal breakers for me. These are like the 5 major things that are absolutely essential for me in a marriage. And I really need to ensure that I investigate those aspects pretty thoroughly. And I think a lot of people, if you're being honest with yourself and reflective, you can start to feel like being a bit too much here versus being appropriately critical. Sometimes guidance is really helpful, like asking peers, elders, others around you for counsel as to whether is this warranted? Am I being a bit too much here? Going with this, and then also if you start to find yourself just kind of cycling through candidates, right, all the time, then that's also a good indicator because you're just like, yeah, this didn't work out, that didn't work out, and you're like, nobody's going to, again, nobody is yourself, right? So so you're not going to find the exact factory manufactured individual to suit all of your needs. But maybe, Asi, we should wrap up with the year. You have some final thoughts to share with us?
Yes. So I apologize for those who have such amazing questions and we weren't able to get to them. But Khalil Center does offer premarital counseling. So if you are looking to get married, if you are engaged to be married, please do consider taking up that opportunity and meeting up with one of our amazing clinicians. Um, and just to wrap up, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to implement these points in our life and in our marriages. This program is recorded for those who wish to go back and listen. And if you wish to see more programs like this, again, please, please, please donate to Khalil Center at khalilcenter.com/donate. And we will try our best to provide more programs such as these. And that's about it. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Human and Ustada Sana for sharing such amazing gems. Inshallah, I hope to implement these in my lives, and I'm sure everyone else over here that tuned in as well. Signing off from my end. Again, you could see this later on, inshallah. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.